If I haven't talked to you since 2023, take that as a sign that you don't exist to me anymore. Damn, you bug. You got sprayed with the raid. Bye. See you never.
I have covered this incident many times in the past on an older channel of mine that is no longer active. And I really have to say that I am glad people are starting to not just take notice of Josh Peck being not so great of a person, but also manipulating situations to make Drake Bell look bad. As of filming this video though, Josh has reached out to Drake in a positive way, though the previous stuff is just insane. Honestly, that is hardly the most important point in the video. It does show that if people like Josh even attempted to understand what was going on at Nickelodeon, or even have a tiny bit of humanity, things may have gone better for the victims. Assuming there would have been victims, that is. This is the story of how awful Hollywood, especially Nickelodeon, have been to children, and the story of how people in Hollywood will lie or defend Hollywood networks like Nickelodeon to remain rich and famous. Hey everyone, I hope y'all are doing well. This is a bit of a different side of crime for the channel, but true crime nonetheless. I appreciate y'all being here, and a subscribe to the channel would be absolutely amazing if you enjoy this video. Dan Schneider at this point is probably very well known to you for being a creep. Most people think of Jamie Lynn Spears and the crazy rumors about her having his child. Less people know, but it's still quite popular about how he destroyed Amanda Bynes as a person. The creepy emancipation attempt to divorce her from her parents at only the age of 16, making headline news. And her walking through the streets nude not that long ago in an apparent mental breakdown, of course, was a headline as well. Then, of course, the most popular, as of recent, probably has to be from Jennette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, which I covered in a previous video, linked in the description below, and it'll be at the end screen where you can click it and all that, but go check it out. I think it was a pretty decent video, which will be tying into some drama between Jennette McCurdy and Josh Peck. Speaking of Jennette, you know things are bad when Nickelodeon offers you $300,000 to keep quiet about Dan Schneider. Now, you are probably wondering what this also has to do with Josh Peck and Drake Bell, or perhaps you watched Quiet on the Set and are not wondering at all. Before the documentary Quiet on the Set came out, which, by the way, I seriously recommend you watch if you have not watched it yet, the majority of the info we had about the creeps of Nickelodeon were from disgruntled child actors. However, after watching the documentary, I never knew how bad things were for everyone, including the writing staff, video editors, and the parents of the child actors. There are many situations where mass false accusations can come out against someone. I will not name names, but you can always tell when false accusations crop up. However, these accusations of Dan Schneider always fall into the same exact category and describe the same behavior across the board. Do not get me wrong, accusations are still that, accusations. But when there is a certain consistency, it's incredibly hard to ignore. And also not believe. Dan had people employed who were arrested for possession of, I'm just gonna say CP, I can't say anything else on YouTube, and who interacted inappropriately to the children on set. One such person famously got arrested in 2003 and convicted in 2004. His name is Brian Peck. No relation to Josh Peck. He ended up only spending 16 months in jail and immediately was employed by Disney upon release. That's right, all children's networks are bad. This was a decently famous case, and speaking of which, he was specifically working on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Yeah, creepy. As we all know, the child that he ended up messing with was Drake Bell. He met Brian Peck through Dan Schneider at Dan's camp. The very camp that you would get discovered for a role if you were hanging out in the swimming pool where all the creepy adults would be watching and likely be to cast you if you were there. This incident with Brian Peck took place during filming of The Amanda Show and involved anesthetics. It went as far as you could possibly imagine while he was alone with Drake at his house, at Brian Peck's house, that is. I cannot get into the details of what happened because YouTube rules about being too graphic, but the case is very easy to find. Go ahead and look it up, but just be warned, it's very graphic, it's very brutal, and it's very, very creepy, to say the least. But just to give another creepy example, he was apparently pen pals with John Wayne Gacy, which is very weird, and apparently he would show the kids on set his letters between him and John Wayne Gacy. Speaking of letters anyway, it's shameful the amount of people who wrote letters to the judge for leniency for Brian Peck. during his sentencing. Very, very famous people. And a lot of them now have reached out to Drake to apologize. In my opinion, too late. Way too late to apologize. Some of the letters had read that Brian Peck would not have done this unless he was severely tempted, putting all the blame on Drake Bell. Drake Bell had only his brother and his mom in the courtroom on his side, and Brian Peck had the entire other side of the courtroom packed in support for him. There is never, ever a point where any person could ever argue that a child is at fault for an adult doing bad things to them. You don't get tempted by anybody underage, period. That is never okay. There's never a point in time where that's okay. I don't care how hard the temptation is. If you are actually tempted, you are a sick person that needs to be behind bars for the rest of your life. He never should have had just 16 months. He should have been in prison for the rest of his life. And yet, Disney took him after that. Dan Schneider claims he helped Drake's mom write her letter to the judge to help him get convicted. Well, there's problems with Drake's mom that I don't really want to get into. I don't know that Drake even forgives his mom. I don't know what his relationship with his mom is like after watching Quiet on the Set. I can only assume that he doesn't have much of a relationship with his mom. He seems to blame her. I don't know, though, for a fact. I don't want to disparage her. He didn't mention anything along those lines. So I'm just kind of taking a guess. That being said, the whole situation happened because his mother was too lazy to drive him to his acting gigs. And the father did not want Drake anywhere near Brian Peck. Brian Peck weaseled his way in between him and Drake's father. As we all know, Brian Peck tricked Drake into thinking that his father was stealing his money because he didn't like his father, and he didn't like that his father was telling Brian to stop touching Drake and stop being weird around him. His dad could see what was going on from a mile away. Ended up tricking Drake into thinking his dad was spending his money. Ended up going to live with his mom. The mom, of course, I'm pretty sure just wanted to get back at her ex-husband or something. Took Drake in and said, no, I'm going to be his manager now. And then, of course, his dad said, fine, if this is what makes Drake happy, I'll do it. But you need to keep Brian away from Drake. There's something wrong with him. She immediately ignored it and was like, you know what? Here you go, Brian. You take him. Well, we see how that turned out. Now, I don't want to say any more than that, but that's the gist of what I got from that documentary. Maybe I'm wrong in the way that I'm explaining it. Maybe it wasn't that malicious against Drake's dad, but I don't know. That's just the vibe I got. Dan had many creeps at his camp and on sets of different shows, not to mention the inappropriate stuff with feet. And I mean tons of foot scenes that were just creepy and weird to me even as a kid. Not to mention Ariana Grande spilling water down her chest and milking a potato screaming, give me the juice. Absolutely a creep for that.
Sometimes I wonder if you can get juice from a potato. Come on, give up the juice. I'm thirsty. It's not possible.
Knowing all of this, knowing there is a case with a conviction that makes things fairly cut and dry, and on top of that, hearing all of these accusations towards Dan Schneider and the consistency of it would make it weird for people to defend him. Yet that's the angle Josh Peck and a few others have taken. This is where we start to see similarities between Josh and Dan. Dan, who had something to prove early in his acting days, had a similar path to Josh, where they both did not want to be the funny fat kid and felt the world was against them. This seems to have made them develop an ego, or at least Dan developed it and made a connection with Josh that encouraged him to go down the same path. Either way, both of them have been very, very open about this, which seems to have made Josh hate Drake. It's kind of weird that his hatred for Drake is coming down because he didn't want to be typecasted as the funny fat kid. And I guess it's because Drake wasn't fat or something and was the cool guy that, you know, Josh was the kind of fat, nerdy guy that was the butt of every joke. And I understand that when you're a kid that's overweight and all eyes are on you and kind of making fun of you for that, I understand that that doesn't feel good. And he clearly did something about that in the most positive way. He lost weight, he got more serious into acting, but I just don't see why the hatred for Drake had to come into it. I don't see why he still couldn't be a funny guy in general. It's just odd. I felt like he took it way too personal. And it's funny because that is the same route that Dan went for the most part, except he didn't lose weight. He just didn't want to be the funny fat kid. He didn't want to be the butt of the jokes. So I feel like that they resonated with each other and probably have talked about this. But again, I don't know for a fact. It's just weird that they both acted the same way and both have spoke out about it the same way. And then Josh is defending Dan Schneider. I gotta say, there's probably a reason for it on some sort of personal level like that. Another clip I want to show you is how Josh claims Jennette owes him another interview since they scrapped their first one.
Did you ever have any interactions with Dan Schneider?
He created my show.
Yes! Sorry.
Both shows I was on.
I've been in a little Dan Schneider TikTok rabbit hole lately.
Everyone is.
I read Jennette McCurdy's book. I thought it was an amazing book.
So did we, despite what Jennette says.
What did? Oh, did she think?
She was our first ever guest.
Really?
Like the day that she released her book. Like she was becoming it. She came on. It was an amazing get for us. We were truly good guys. Unbelievable interview. Spoke about everything that she wanted to, nothing that she didn't want to. It ended, and she told us not to run it. We've spoken about this endlessly. So there is an unreleased episode of our podcast. The two of us and Jennette.
Just being the good guys we are, said Jennette, no problem, we'll kill it.
Yeah.
Do you want to come back on? No response. So 4 or 5 months later, we got you. We got H Duff. I'm like, we're killing it. Let me check in. She owes us. All I wrote to Jennette after 6 months was, hi. Hi.
Oh, that's tough.
I got a green bubble. Am I blocked?
Oh, wow.
I think I might be blocked.
Oh, wow.
Or she was on a 12-hour flight.
It's creepy to act like she owes you anything, Josh. As I and most people feel, the only thing they could have possibly disagreed on was Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider, who Josh clearly still defends to this day. It was obvious to me then, which is why I talked about it back in the day on my old channel, and incredibly obvious now. I'm very happy to see more people understanding that, though. One issue I have with the documentaries like this, though, is when they fish for anything that could be creepy and claim that it was 100% done to be creepy, like the superhero Noseboy. They claimed it was a quote-unquote money shot scene, I guess is the best thing I can say on YouTube without getting completely wrecked, when he sneezes loud and shoots goop all over a woman's face. However, it not only was very obvious that it was from a nose, and that it was a sneeze, and that it looked like snot, they claimed it was definitely done for inappropriate reasons, as you can imagine. And they were like, oh, that's clearly a shot from someone's nether region. But you can clearly hear him go, achoo! And even as a kid, I never once questioned. But as a kid, I did question other scenes, like the squeezing of the potato, which I was a little older then. But definitely, some stuff that took place, especially the feet thing, I was always really creeped out about. Now, I didn't know that it was an inappropriate, fetish thing. That being said, every time I would see people do stuff with their feet, I was really grossed out, and I was like, why would they do this? It was weird. I just didn't like it. If I was feeling off about it, clearly, especially looking back today, it was very inappropriate. So guys, if it's that unclear, do not make the claim. It makes people question if this is legit or not. Just not a good idea. Report the claims, the crimes, and the actual definitive inappropriate stuff instead of maybe this was inappropriate. Not to mention, Kel from Kenan and Kel has an ex-wife who was interviewed. I'm not saying she was lying, but I find it weird how she claimed to have people all over her, being preyed upon directly and straightforward. This is odd because she was not underage, and claimed the staff was on her and pressuring her to do things. So she would lock herself in Kel's dressing room to avoid the creeps. This is so on the nose and so out of character to what everyone else claims that I just cannot buy into it. It's claims like this that can damage a case. I feel the people of Quiet on the Set should have done just a little bit better of a job on those aspects, and should have taken better precautions to make sure things matched up better. Now, one person that I really had a problem with, and I cannot find his name. I can't remember who he was, but you all will know the part. It's in part 1 of Quiet on the Set. He was fired after admitting he was underperforming due to his divorce. I really hated this point. Even though it doesn't make Dan look like a great person, it's pretty common practice to fire people who are not doing their job. Just saying. While I myself may have had more sympathy than Dan, this is hardly a criticism in my opinion. The guy was not doing his job. He was going through a divorce, and I understand that that's horrible. I would hate to go through something like that. I would absolutely not be performing well myself, probably. But the problem is you can't just not do your job. You're getting paid for it still. You can't just walk into work, do nothing, and then expect to get paid. Especially people who are making that kind of money in Hollywood. I'm sure the guy was making a pretty good salary above the average American. I would almost guarantee it. And if you're just not doing your job at all, well, they have deadlines to make. They have to get an episode out by a certain time, or Nickelodeon will drop them. There's just no way around it. They didn't have a choice but to fire the guy. This was such a terrible thing to bring up. It is clear how awful Nickelodeon treated kids. It's awful how many adults tried to have adult interactions with the kids and got away with it. Nickelodeon claims that they investigate and do everything they can to ensure a safe environment, but this is very clearly a lie. Parents, please always watch your kids. Never allow them to be alone, and encourage your kids to stay in a group with each other. Not to mention encouraging them to always be outspoken. The buck always stops with the parent. While there is so much more to this Nickelodeon scandal, I do not quite have time to talk about everything today. For example, the incredibly scripted interview Dan did to soften the blow from Quiet on the Set. Everyone absolutely saw through it, and it's just not worth the time to go over in this video. It was just a bad interview. Nobody believes it. But if you would like to see more about this subject, please leave a comment below. And thank you all so much for being here. And please remember to stay safe, be aware, and protect yourselves.